The silence of space fractured with the arrival of the Zentari battlecruiser. Its obsidian hull gleamed against the backdrop of New Phoenix Colony, a seemingly insignificant human settlement nestled on the edge of explored space. Admiral Kreltak studied the planet's surface through multilensed optics, his exoskeleton shifting with a mixture of contempt and anticipation. Jack Morrison knew they were coming long before the first sensor ping. From the colony's primary communications hub, a converted agricultural warehouse that looked nothing like a military installation, Morrison watched. His fingers hovered over a holographic interface that pulsed with more complexity than any alien technology could comprehend. To the untrained eye, he appeared relaxed, almost bored. But every muscle in his body was coiled like a predator waiting to strike. The Zentari had made a fatal mistake. They believed they were conducting a standard reconnaissance mission, a show of force meant to intimidate the newest species to emerge on the galactic stage. What they didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this moment since they first looked up at the stars and realized they weren't alone. "Incoming transmission," announced Sarah Rodriguez, the colony's communications specialist. Her voice was calm, almost mechanical. "They're using standard diplomatic encryption. Shall I route it through the standard channels?" Morrison's lips curved into a slight smile. "Negative. Prepare secondary communication protocol. Route everything through the quantum relay." The quantum relay was something the Zentari had no concept of, a communication system that was part technology, part adaptive network that could process and redirect information faster than any known galactic communication method. It was a human innovation that defied the conventional understanding of information transfer. Admiral Kreltak's image materialized in the communication center, a towering insectoid creature with multiple compound eyes and an exoskeleton that shifted colors based on emotional states. Right now, it was displaying a deep crimson of superiority and mild aggression. Inhabitants of human colony designation, New Phoenix. The translation matrix converted the aliens' clicking language into precise English. "We represent the Zentari Confederation. Your settlement is located in contested galactic territory. State your intentions and prepare for diplomatic assessment." Morrison exchanged a quick glance with Rodriguez. They had practiced this moment countless times. The colony itself was nothing remarkable from orbital scanners. Prefabricated structures, agricultural zones, minimal defensive infrastructure. But every building, every piece of equipment, every human walking the surface was part of a larger, more complex system. What the Zentari didn't know was that New Phoenix was more than a colony. It was a carefully constructed hunting ground. "This is Jack Morrison, Colony Communications Director," he responded, his voice measured and calm. "We acknowledge your transmission and welcome diplomatic discussion." Behind the scenes, a complex network of systems activated. Microscopic drones embedded in the colony's infrastructure began their silent work. Sensor arrays that looked like simple communication towers recalibrated, their true purpose masked by layers of technological camouflage. The Zentari believed they were conducting a standard first contact protocol. They had no idea they were already being dissected, analyzed, and categorized. Rodriguez's fingers danced across her console, routing information through channels the Zentari couldn't even perceive. Each transmission was a probe, gathering data about the alien vessel's communication systems, energy signatures, and potential vulnerabilities. Diplomatic assessment requires physical presence. The Admiral's translation continued. "Prepare landing zone for official delegation." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Understood. Coordinates will be transmitted momentarily." The coordinates they would receive were precise, but not to any landing zone the Zentari would expect. Instead, they were an invitation to a carefully prepared stage, where humanity would begin to reveal its true nature. First contact was never about peaceful introduction. For humans, it was about survival. And survival meant understanding your predator before they understood you. The hunt was about to begin. The Galactic Research Council chamber fell silent as Dr. Emily Reyes activated her holographic presentation. Her dark eyes swept across the assembled alien scientists, beings who had spent millennia studying biological diversity, yet remained completely unprepared for what she was about to reveal. Humanity, she began, her voice calm and clinical, is not what you believe we are. The hologram flickered to life, displaying a complex biological schematic that made even the most seasoned xenobiologists shift uncomfortably. What looked like a simple human DNA strand was anything but ordinary. Each genetic sequence told a story of adaptation, of survival that defied every known biological principle in the galaxy. Dr. Michael Chen, standing beside her, activated a secondary display showing human physiological response patterns. The data was staggering. Where other species had specialized into narrow evolutionary paths, humans remained maddeningly generalist, a biological Swiss Army knife of survival mechanisms. Consider human healing, Dr. Rice continued. The hologram zoomed into cellular structures that seemed to defy conventional understanding. Most species develop specialized healing mechanisms. Humans, they've retained and enhanced every possible survival adaptation. A Zorn researcher, a crystalline being known for its advanced medical knowledge, interrupted. That's impossible. No single species can maintain such diverse adaptive capabilities. Dr. Chen's response was a cold smile. Watch. The presentation revealed layers of human biological complexity that challenged everything the Council thought they knew. Humans possessed genetic markers that allowed rapid adaptation to extreme environments. Their immune systems weren't just defensive, they were offensive weapons, capable of breaking down and learning from potential threats at an unprecedented rate. Genetic memory, Dr. Rice explained, is not just a theoretical concept for humans. It's a living, active system of survival. The hologram showed how human DNA contained remnants of survival mechanisms from every stage of their evolutionary history. Genetic markers from high-altitude populations, Arctic survivors, tropical inhabitants, all coexisting in a single genetic framework. Where other species specialized, humans remained perpetually adaptable. Most shocking was the human capacity for neuroplasticity. The brain scans showed neural networks that could literally rewire themselves in response to environmental challenges. What took other species generations, humans accomplished in months, sometimes weeks. Your species develops specialized organs, Dr. Chen interjected, pointing to various alien representatives. The Zorn have crystal-based neural networks. The Kelfri have distributed respiratory systems. Humans, we've retained the ability to modify our entire biological framework. The Galactic Research Council watched in growing unease. The presentation wasn't just a scientific report. It was a warning. A Kelfri diplomat raised a trembling appendage. Are you suggesting humans are some form of biological weapon? Dr. Rice laughed, a sound that sent chills through the chamber. We're not a weapon. We're survivors, the most perfect evolutionary machine the galaxy has ever encountered. The genetic data told a story of constant adaptation. Humans could survive in environments that would kill most species. Their cellular structure contained adaptive mechanisms that could modify metabolic processes, adjust to radiation levels, and even temporarily alter genetic expression under extreme stress. Consider deep-sea adaptation, Dr. Chen demonstrated. A series of genetic sequences showed how human DNA could temporarily modify oxygen absorption capabilities. Most species would require millennia to develop such an adaptation. Humans, we do it within generations. The implications were terrifying. Humans weren't just another species. They were a living, breathing evolutionary algorithm, constantly learning, constantly adapting, never settling into a single specialized form. Dr. Rice's final slide was simplicity itself, a single human silhouette surrounded by a complex web of genetic potential. We are not defined by what we are, she said softly. We are defined by what we can become. The Galactic Research Council understood then what the Zenturi would soon learn. Humanity was not just a species to be studied. They were a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. The holographic display in the Syndicate's primary strategy room flickered with a mosaic of battlefield data. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rodriguez stood motionless, his eyes scanning the intricate web of tactical information that most alien minds would find incomprehensible. "Analyze previous engagement patterns," he commanded softly. The room's advanced AI began its presentation. Each previous human-alien conflict played out in miniature holographic reconstructions. Each battle a complex dance of strategy that defied conventional military understanding. The Syndicate's top military strategists watched in growing horror. Humans didn't just fight. They learned. Every single engagement was a classroom. Every conflict a comprehensive training exercise that transformed military doctrine in real time. Where other species relied on millennia-old tactical frameworks, humans rewrote their entire strategic approach between battles. Captain Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Alex, but cut from the same intellectual cloth, stepped forward. Her latest analysis revealed a pattern that terrified the alien observers. Human military adaptation wasn't linear. It was exponential. "Watch the progression," she explained, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The first engagement with the Kelfree mercenary fleet showed a human defensive force using conventional Earth-based military tactics. Predictable. Manageable. By the third encounter, those same tactics had been completely dismantled and reconstructed. The Kelfree had specific gravitational combat protocols developed over centuries. Humans studied these protocols during the first encounter, identified weaknesses, and developed entirely new combat systems before the second battle even began. "They're not just analyzing," whispered a Zorn military advisor. "They're predicting." Each holographic reconstruction showed how human military intelligence worked differently from any known galactic species. Where others saw a battle, humans saw a complex problem-solving exercise. Weapon systems were not just tools. They were living systems to be understood, modified, and ultimately transcended. Alex Rodriguez's personal research file appeared, a document that had become legendary among military analysts. His doctoral thesis on adaptive combat systems had been dismissed as theoretical madness when first presented. Now it was being used as a primary training manual across human defense forces. The key was something the aliens couldn't comprehend. Humans viewed failure not as a defeat, but as critical data collection. A Syndicate strategist tried to interrupt. "Your adaptation rate is statistically impossible. No species can." Elena cut him off. "Probability is a human invention. We don't just calculate odds. We change them." The holographic display shifted, showing a comprehensive breakdown of human technological adaptation. In the span of months, human engineers had reverse-engineered Kelfree energy weapon systems, identified their fundamental technological limitations, and developed countermeasures that made the original designs obsolete. Most shocking was the speed. What took the Kelfree generations, humans accomplished in weeks, not through superior technology, but through a fundamentally different approach to problem-solving. Military strategy wasn't about winning a single battle. It was about understanding the entire system of conflict. "Look at the pattern," Alex said, zooming into a microscopic tactical analysis. "We're not fighting. We're evolving." Each engagement became a node in a massive, living network of tactical knowledge. Soldiers weren't just individual fighters. They were data points in a complex, adaptive system that learned and grew with every single interaction. The Syndicate's most advanced predictive algorithms began to break down when attempting to model human military behavior. Traditional strategic modeling assumed consistent behavioral patterns. Humans introduced a level of unpredictability that bordered on quantum uncertainty. "They don't have a strategy," Elena explained. "They have a methodology of constant reinvention." The final presentation drove the point home. A comprehensive timeline showing how human military technology had transformed from traditional kinetic weapons to adaptive nanosystems in less than a human generation. Each technological leap was not just an improvement, it was a complete reimagining of warfare itself. The room fell silent. Humanity wasn't just another species learning to fight. They were rewriting the entire concept of conflict. The first wave of Syndicate dropships breached the atmosphere of New Phoenix Colony, their sleek hulls gleaming with advanced weaponry. Commander Sarah Williams watched from the colony's central defense hub, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that looked deceptively simple. What the invading forces didn't understand was that New Phoenix was never just a colony. It was a meticulously designed killing ground. Every structure, every piece of infrastructure, every seemingly innocuous agricultural zone was part of an intricate defensive network. The colony wasn't going to be defended. It was going to fight back. The first dropships touched down in what appeared to be an open agricultural field. Syndicate ground troops, a mix of cybernetic mercenaries and biological combat units, began their standard invasion protocol. Breach, secure, advance. A tactic that had worked on 100 different worlds. New Phoenix was not those worlds. Thermal networks activated. Williams murmured to her small team of defense coordinators. Begin Phase 1. The ground beneath the invading forces began to change. What looked like simple soil was actually a complex network of adaptive camouflage and defensive systems. Microscopic sensors embedded in every cubic centimeter of terrain started to analyze, calculate, and respond. The first hint of trouble came when the Syndicate troops' environmental suits began to malfunction. Temperature readings went haywire. Moisture absorption systems became unpredictable. The seemingly open field transformed into a living, breathing defensive mechanism. Biodegradable electromagnetic disruptors online, announced Marcus Chen, the colony's chief technological strategist. They won't even know what's happening. Syndicate combat units relied on advanced sensor technologies. New Phoenix had spent years developing systems that could not just block those sensors, but actively mislead them. What looked like a clear path of advance was actually a carefully constructed illusion. The 1st Syndicate Battalion lost contact with its command structure within minutes. Sarah Williams allowed herself a slight smile. Humans didn't just defend. They hunted. Underground networks, originally designed for agricultural water management, now became a complex system of movement and tactical redirection. The invading forces found themselves herded, their advance carefully controlled by systems they couldn't even perceive. They're moving exactly where we want them, Marcus confirmed, tracking the invasion forces' progression through a multi-layered holographic display. What made New Phoenix truly terrifying was its adaptive nature. Traditional defensive systems were static. This was something entirely different. The colony itself was a living weapon, capable of real-time reconfiguration and response. The Syndicate had planned for resistance. They had not planned for a world that fought back. Automated defense systems began to activate, but these weren't traditional weapons. They were adaptive combat platforms that could change their operational parameters faster than the invading forces could comprehend their threat. Agricultural drones, originally designed for crop management, now became precision targeting systems. Irrigation networks transformed into complex liquid-based defensive mechanisms. Even the colony's atmospheric processors became weapons. Gravitational disruption fields coming online, Williams announced. The invading forces found themselves fighting an environment that was actively working against them. Gravity became unpredictable. Terrain shifted. What looked like solid ground could become a liquid surface in milliseconds. Most terrifying was the psychological warfare. The Syndicate troops began to lose cohesion, not through direct combat, but through systematic environmental manipulation. Their communication systems became unreliable. Their environmental suits turned from protection to potential threat. Marcus Chen tracked the invasion's progression with clinical precision. They've lost 40% combat effectiveness, and they haven't even seen a single human defender. By the time the Syndicate realized the true nature of their situation, it was too late. New Phoenix wasn't just a colony. It was a perfectly designed predatory environment. Humans didn't just survive. They transformed the entire concept of defense into an art of hunting. The interrogation room was nothing like what the captured syndicate soldiers expected. There were no restraints, no traditional intimidation tactics, just a simple white room and Michael Chen, a man whose very presence seemed to unsettle them more than any physical threat ever could. "Tell me about your fears," Chen said, his voice calm and analytical. The syndicate soldiers exchanged nervous glances. They had been trained for physical torture, for resistance. They had not been prepared for this. Psychological warfare was a human invention that went far beyond simple manipulation. It was a complex science, a method of understanding and exploiting the fundamental vulnerabilities of any intelligent system, biological or technological. Dr. Rachel Bennett, Chen's colleague in xenopsychological research, watched from behind a one-way observation window. Her notes were already filling complex neural networks, breaking down the psychological response patterns of the captured soldiers. "Humans don't just fight," Bennett had written in her groundbreaking research paper. "We deconstruct." Each syndicate soldier represented a unique psychological profile. Where other species saw individual combatants, humans saw complex systems of motivation, fear, and potential manipulation. Chen began with the most junior soldier, a young Krell tax recruit whose exoskeleton still showed signs of the recent battle. "What motivates you?" he asked, his tone devoid of any emotional attachment. The soldier stammered. The question was too simple, yet impossibly complex. Most alien interrogation techniques relied on physical or technological methods of information extraction. Humans had developed something far more nuanced. They understood that information was just another form of psychological currency. "Your combat unit," Chen continued, "was designed to be a cohesive psychological entity. But I can see the fractures, the individual fears that you've been trained to suppress." The observation room filled with complex holographic displays, micro-expressions, neural response patterns, subtle physiological changes. Each was being mapped and analyzed in real time. Dr. Bennett's research had proven something terrifying. Humans could weaponize empathy as effectively as any physical weapon. Understanding was not just knowledge, it was a form of psychological combat. The syndicate had sophisticated mind protection protocols. Developed over centuries, these were considered unbreakable by galactic standards. Michael Chen saw them as an interesting puzzle to be solved. Every psychological defense, he often told his colleagues, is just a complex pattern waiting to be understood. The interrogation wasn't about extracting information. It was about understanding the entire psychological ecosystem of the enemy. Chen began to speak about the soldiers' homeworld, about the specific gravitational conditions of their birth planet. He described details that no external intelligence should know. Each fact a carefully constructed key designed to unlock psychological defenses. The soldier's exoskeleton began to show signs of stress. Not physical stress, psychological stress. Humans had discovered something fundamental about intelligent systems. Every defense mechanism contains the seeds of its own vulnerability. "You're afraid," Chen said softly, "not of what we might do to you. You're afraid of what you might become." The observation room was silent. Dr. Bennett's neural network was collecting data at an unprecedented rate. Each moment of the interrogation was being converted into a comprehensive understanding of alien psychological structures. Most species saw psychological warfare as a weapon. Humans saw it as a form of advanced communication. The syndicate soldier began to speak, not because of torture, not because of physical threat, but because the fundamental nature of their psychological defenses had been systematically dismantled. Piece by piece, thought by thought. Humans didn't break enemies. They understood them so completely that resistance became meaningless. The research vessel Horizon hung in space like a promise of technological revolution. Commander Rachel Bennett stood on the bridge, watching as her team dismantled the latest piece of captured alien technology, a sensor array from the Kelfrey research fleet that had been considered unbreakable by galactic standards. 36 hours, she muttered. That's all we'll need. Where other species saw technological artifacts as immutable systems, humans saw them as complex puzzles waiting to be solved, reimagined, and ultimately transcended. Dr. James Rodriguez, the vessel's chief technological strategist, was already 3 steps ahead. His neural interface flickered with complex algorithmic patterns, breaking down the alien technology at a molecular level. The Kelfri had spent centuries developing this sensor array. Humans would understand it, improve it, and render it obsolete before the original creators could comprehend what had happened. Quantum entanglement signatures are fascinating, Rodriguez commented, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to respond to his thoughts more than his actual touch. They've developed a communication method that relies on probabilistic wave function collapses. Primitive, but interesting. The Horizon was more than a research vessel. It was a living laboratory of technological adaptation. Every captured piece of alien technology was not just studied, it was completely reimagined. Most alien research teams would spend decades analyzing a single technological artifact. The human approach was fundamentally different. They didn't just analyze. They deconstructed, understood, and then reconstructed at a pace that defied conventional scientific understanding. Structural integrity of the quantum communication matrix, Rodriguez continued, shows 3 primary weakness points. We can enhance transmission efficiency by 247% and reduce energy consumption by 63%. Commander Bennett watched the holographic displays, each showing a different layer of technological deconstruction. Molecular structures, quantum mechanics, energy transfer systems, each was being mapped, understood, and ultimately improved upon. The captured Kelfri sensor array was about to become something entirely new. What made human technological adaptation truly terrifying was its unpredictability. Traditional technological development followed linear paths. Humans worked in quantum leaps, transforming entire technological paradigms in the span of weeks. Dr. Emily Chen, the vessel's xenotechnological specialist, was already preparing the first prototype of the reimagined sensor system. Where the original Kelfri design required massive power systems and complex cooling mechanisms, the human version would be smaller, more efficient, and exponentially more powerful. Information is just another form of energy, Chen often said, and humans are the most efficient energy conversion system in the galaxy. The Bridge of the Horizon was a symphony of technological innovation. Neural interfaces, adaptive quantum computing systems, and holographic displays that seemed to think alongside their human operators. Each system was a testament to humanity's fundamental approach to technology, not as a static tool, but as a living, evolving organism. Rodriguez's latest analysis appeared on the primary display, a comprehensive breakdown of the Kelfri sensor array's technological lineage, with projected human improvements highlighted in brilliant quantum blue. We're not just reverse engineering, he explained to a junior researcher who was watching in awe. We're rewriting the entire concept of technological development. Most alien species saw technology as something to be preserved. Humans saw it as something to be constantly challenged, dismantled, and rebuilt. The first prototype of the reimagined sensor array took shape. Where the original Kelfri design was a massive, complex system, the human version was elegant in its simplicity, smaller, more efficient, capable of processing information at speeds that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. Commander Bennett allowed herself a slight smile. This was why humans were feared across the galaxy. Not because of their weapons, not because of their military might, but because they could take an enemy's most advanced technology and make it look like a child's primitive toy. Prototype ready for initial testing, Dr. Chen announced. The horizon hummed with potential. Another technological barrier was about to be shattered. The Galactic Council Chamber was a monument to millennia of diplomatic tradition. Ornate architecture from 100 different species created a space that had witnessed countless negotiations, treaties, and political machinations. Daniel Harris stood at the center of this historical arena, looking distinctly out of place and entirely in control. The representatives from the Centauri Confederation, the Kelfrey Alliance, and a dozen other galactic powers watched him with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled hostility. Diplomacy, to most of these species, was a complex dance of subtle threats and carefully parsed language. Daniel Harris was about to rewrite those rules. "We're not here to negotiate," he began, his voice cutting through the chamber's elaborate acoustic design. "We're here to establish a fundamental understanding." The translation matrices worked overtime, capturing not just his words, but the complex layers of communication that humans had perfected. Most species communicated. Humans weaponized communication. Ambassador Krultax of the Centauri Confederation was the first to respond. "Your recent actions constitute a direct violation of." Harris cut him off. Not with anger, not with aggression, but with a precision that made the entire chamber fall silent. "Let's discuss what really matters," he said, activating a holographic display that began to deconstruct the Centauri's diplomatic argument before it could fully form. Each point of their prepared statement was systematically analyzed, its underlying motivations exposed, its logical inconsistencies laid bare. What made human diplomacy truly terrifying was its fundamental approach. Other species saw negotiations as a zero-sum game. Humans saw them as a complex problem-solving exercise. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the chief strategic analyst accompanying Harris, began to overlay additional context. Economic projections, technological potential, resource distribution models, each presented not as a threat, but as a collaborative opportunity. The Kelfrey representative tried to interject. "Your expansion rate is exactly what the galactic ecosystem requires," Harris finished, his presentation now showing how human technological and colonial expansion actually stabilized several critical resource zones that had been in conflict for generations. Most diplomatic negotiations were about maintaining existing power structures. Humans were proposing something entirely different, a complete reimagining of galactic interaction. "We're not asking for permission," Daniel Harris explained, his tone clinical and precise. "We're offering a fundamental upgrade to the current galactic system." The holographic displays began to show complex simulations, how human technological approaches could solve critical resource challenges, how their adaptive colonization methods could stabilize regions that had been in conflict for centuries. Ambassador Krultax realized something terrifying. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a complete strategic recalibration of galactic political structures. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis was brutal in its simplicity. Human expansion wasn't about territory. It was about systemic problem-solving. Each new colony was a living laboratory of adaptive solutions to complex challenges. "Your current diplomatic framework," Harris continued, "is a relic. It assumes scarcity. We operate on a model of potential." The chamber was silent. The translation matrices worked overtime, capturing not just words, but the complex psychological undercurrents of a species that saw diplomacy as a form of collective problem-solving. What the galactic powers didn't understand was that humans weren't trying to conquer. They were trying to optimize. Every diplomatic encounter was a chance to demonstrate a fundamentally different approach to species-level interaction, not through force, not through threat, but through a comprehensive understanding of systemic potential. "We're not your enemies," Daniel Harris said, his final statement a masterpiece of strategic communication. "We're the evolutionary upgrade your current system requires." The Galactic Council chamber would never be the same. Humanity had just redefined the entire concept of diplomatic engagement. The final gathering was not what anyone expected. Not a battlefield. Not a diplomatic chamber. Just a single room on a nondescript space station, with Jack Morrison seated at the center of a circular table surrounded by representatives from every major galactic power. Silence hung in the air like a weapon. "You don't understand us," Morrison began, his voice calm and clinical. "And that's been your greatest mistake." The Centauri Confederation's lead diplomat, Ambassador Krultax, had spent centuries preparing for this moment. Sophisticated translation matrices, intricate psychological warfare protocols, layers of diplomatic defenses that had dismantled 100 different species. None of them would work here. Dr. Emily Reyes stood slightly behind Morrison, her research files creating a holographic backdrop that told the true story of humanity, not as conquerors, not as diplomats, but as the most perfectly evolved survival mechanism the galaxy had ever encountered. "We are not here to rule," Morrison continued. "We are here to ensure our survival. And anything that threatens that becomes prey." The fundamental misunderstanding of human nature was about to be revealed. Most galactic species viewed existence as a complex political game. Territorial expansion, resource accumulation, diplomatic maneuvering. Humans saw it as something far more primal, a continuous process of survival and adaptation. Dr. Michael Chen's comprehensive research appeared on the holographic displays. Biological adaptations, technological innovations, psychological warfare strategies. Each was not a separate system, but a single, interconnected survival mechanism. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "You've studied our military capabilities," Morrison said. "Our technological adaptations, our psychological warfare techniques. But you've missed the fundamental point." Ambassador Krultax tried to interrupt. A fatal mistake. "Humanity is not a species," Dr. Reyes interjected. "We are a living, adaptive system designed for one purpose: survival." The holographic displays began to show something terrifying. Not just human achievements, but the fundamental pattern behind those achievements. Every technological innovation, every military strategy, every diplomatic encounter. Each was a node in a complex survival network. Most species developed specialized survival mechanisms. Humans remain generalists, the most dangerous evolutionary strategy possible. "We don't want your territories," Morrison explained. "We want to ensure our continued existence, and we will do whatever is necessary to achieve that goal." The research files told a story more complex than any invasion narrative. Humans weren't interested in conquest. They were interested in solving systemic challenges that threatened their survival. Dr. Chen's analysis was brutal in its simplicity. Every human action was a calculated response to potential existential threats, not just physical threats. Technological, biological, psychological, economic. "You've been asking the wrong questions," Morrison continued. "It's not about what we want. It's about what we will do to survive." The galactic representatives began to understand. Slowly, painfully. Humanity wasn't a species to be categorized. They were a living, adaptive system that would transform any challenge into an opportunity for survival. "We are not your enemy," Dr. Reyes said, her final statement a complex symphony of scientific precision. "We are the evolutionary response to systemic complexity." The room fell silent. The universe had just been reminded of a fundamental truth. Survival is not about strength. It's about the ability to adapt faster than the challenge. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.